when you hear Greta say that she's pro-Hamas, okay? When you hear that the feminist movement in Europe are ignoring Israeli girls being raped by Hamas, it was never about feminism. It was never about.
Well, I would refine that thought if I could, just slightly, which is to say, it started as being about that. For some people. I mean, the feminist movement, for some people, was, and it had lots to be said for it in its first and perhaps second wave.
The third wave was never about that.
The third wave was never about that. That was about revolutionaryism. And there's always an element in all of these social movements that wish to improve something. I think the feminist movement did do a great deal of good. But there was always an element within it that wanted to, for instance, go past equal rights onto misandry, man-hating. There were always parts of the feminist movement who wanted to hate men. That's why occasionally there's always an article or a new book. There was one by a French young female author a few years ago about, why we can do without men. There's a sort of every few years that always comes around. And of course, it's a ridiculous argument. And actually, it's not about, as I say, it's not about feminism. It's about man-hating. And my own view, esoteric as it may be, is that I think that the sexes should be able to get on. But anyway, it's the same thing with the Green Movement. I mean, there is a lot to be said for caring about the environment and not destroying the planet. Absolutely. But there's some inevitability that in second wave greenism, it's about revolutionaryism. And you can now, I mean, it's sad when people are completely predictable, but you can predict with 100% accuracy that somebody like Greta Thunberg was going to end up being a sort of anti-Israel activist. You can absolutely pro-Palestinian. What the hell does she know about the Middle East? Oh, come on, she never even went to school.
There was this riot, and one protester said, I wanted to be in a conference about climate, not about Hamas. And he was kicked out from the stage because basically this was about the resentment, the anti-West.
Yes, of course. I don't know enough about Japanese culture. I'd like to know a lot more, but there's obviously a very rich tradition. But I understand from a friend who does know a lot about Japanese culture, that there was in the sort of pre-modern era in Japan, when somebody was we would have said in the Middle Ages, the liege lord of somebody. If you had sworn your allegiance to a military or other, leader, and that leader was killed, you would stagger around the land looking for another person to attach yourself to. I would submit that people like Greta Thunberg, various climate activists, various Palestinian activists in the West.
Judith Butler.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thinker and writer of modern times against really stiff competition. People like that are hopelessly hollowed out individuals. They had sometimes a bit of a belief, and then they just roam the land like empty souls looking for another person to put their allegiance onto. And there are some ready-made allegiances. You can join our fight to attack the climate emergency. Whenever there's not another emergency, it's the climate emergency. Fight to stop the climate emergency, the climate crisis. Don't you agree we're in a climate crisis? And when that's cooled down a bit, they stagger around the land. Free Palestine. If Free Palestine wasn't the thing, as I wrote recently, it would be 20 years ago, it would be free to bed. So you can, these are lost souls looking for meaning. And in a way, one should pity them, except that they're so incredibly unpleasant.
Yes.
And the effects of their stupidity are so appalling.
But again, those leaders are always against West.
Yes. Well, that's the underlying thing. I mean, you mentioned Nietzsche's work on resentment and the genealogy of morals. And of course, as I often say, the Nietzsche in general, but that book in particular has to be approached very carefully, because of course it's also an anti-Christian text, of course, because of Nietzsche's special problems with Christianity, which he believed had introduced a sort of form of victimhood, of course. And I think it's a very stimulating, like all of Nietzsche's, a very stimulating critique, and I don't entirely agree with it. But on resentment, he was one of the great thinkers and
prophets.
A prophet, really, yes. And he did have. I mean, he was. I was reading Ecce Homo recently, his last book before he goes into madness, and I mean, it is. I read it first 25 years ago, and I had no idea what it was about. And this time I was like, I see. It's a terrifying work. I mean, terrifying not least in its simple, unbelievable searingness. One reason why I think the Palestinian issue has become a focal point for people of resentment is that it gives them a purpose to search for cosmic justice through a misunderstanding of what's been happening in this region for the last 80 years and a lot before. And if you are told that a genocide is going on, that an ethnic cleansing, a Holocaust is going on, a prison camp is going on, this is the biggest. Again, I mean, they don't notice the Pakistanis currently moving 2 million people forcibly out of Pakistan. Nobody cares. There are no cameras there. Nobody's videoing it. They don't care about Yemen. They don't care about Syria. They don't care about any of this. They don't care about Muslim lives per se. They mind about Israel defending itself. They mind about the Jewish state defending itself. And there are many. I mean, there's too many other psychological factors to go into in full, but there are many other factors. I mean, for instance, if you're European and you have some hereditary guilt for the Holocaust in whichever country you're in, you can make yourself feel a bit better by saying the Israelis are currently doing the same thing as the Nazis, which therefore means that the Europeans weren't so bad. And there's a lot at play there. Yeah. I mean, and also, of course, don't forget that key one of the opportunity to hurt Jews, which it seems to me is what's going on, the very language that is chosen. Why do they say that Gaza is like the Warsaw Ghetto? I mean, there are so many things you could compare Gaza to in history. But why say the Warsaw Ghetto? Because you want to offend Jews, you want to upset Jews, you want to wound Jews, you want to hurt them. And so I think most of this is a knowing or unknowing effort to taunt Jews.
In your opinion, and I heard your theory about, the comparison to the ghetto Warsaw, the Warsaw Ghetto. The idea is, but why do they want to insult Jews? Why is it? And maybe because Jew represent something that is, the complete opposite of resentment.
Yes. And I think there's something.
Why the Jews?
I think there's very something.
By Dennis Prager. Why the Jews? Okay. Mm-hmm. And the idea, what do we, as the Jewish people, represent that, correlates with the West, that the resentment movement is so anti?
Well, I suppose some people can never quite console themselves to the fact that the Jewish people live.
After we killed Christ?
Maybe for some people that's part of it. I think more there are more proximate issues these days, but I think that certainly within the Arab and Muslim world, there is, as I've mentioned a number of times recently, there is. Bernard Lewis among others, made this point, but there is this Muslim hatred of Jews that comes from the religion, and it comes from the religion in part because if you are the people who've been given the allegedly last revelation from God, then why are things going so badly for you? Why is the GDP of most Muslim countries so terrible unless they happen to strike oil, and even then it just goes to the top 1%. And why, when the Jews have this one slither of land which doesn't have any oil, do they make such a success of it? And so there are lots of causes of resentment within the Arab and Muslim mind. I find, however, the sort of Western latching onto that to be very sinister and sad development. But to finish on a positive note, there's no reason why it's inevitable. Much outside opinion on Israel changed in 1967 and 1973 when the Jews started winning. But plenty of leftists were on board the whole way with Israel. All the people who visited kibbutzes and came and worked for 6 months on kibbutz in the 50s and 60s. That whole movement, largely leftist. And that movement sort of ebbed away because Israel was winning, and when its neighbors tried to wipe it out, managed to stop them doing so. It's at the Deborah Horn point, among others. Sort of it's okay as long as the Jews are losing, or if they're dead. But the moment that they're winning, the moment they're successful, this is intolerable. But that can be turned around. I honestly do believe it's since it's gone so polluted in our lifetimes, we can unpollute it in our lifetimes as well.
After 4 weeks in Israel, do you feel optimistic or more optimistic?
I feel immensely optimistic about this country.
And about this war?
The war is another question. We'll see what happens. But I'm very optimistic about this country because having gone through one of the most divided periods, I think, in Israeli history in the last year, you were attacked in the most bloody way, and the country has come together, and you can feel it everywhere. If I go to visit bases, if I just speak to soldiers on the street, if I go to interview people, the sense of coming together, of this disparate,
of this external enemy, unifies you as a Jew. I think the concept of you were murdered because you were a Jew. This horrible telephone. Yes, Dad, they killed 10 Jews. Yeah, the idea that the concept of Judaism. Yes, you are not Israeli. You are not part of the world. Gadi Taub, which is a mutual friend. Yes, wrote about the people of the big world. You are not the people of the big world, even though that you have like a foreign passport. It doesn't matter. They will see you always as a Jew. And this, I think, many people say, okay, it is real. All the stories that I heard about the Holocaust, yes, they actually see me as different because I'm Jewish. And there is nothing I can do about it to change.
Well, of course. I mean, one of the things that I think the outside world doesn't yet understand enough about the atrocities of the 7th of October is the fact that some of the first victims were exactly the sort of people who were most pro-Palestinian, pro-Gazan, believed in the idea of living side by side, helped them out. What the long-term consequences are for those people, those communities who were butchered. Knowing that, for instance, not just, the women who drove Palestinian children to hospital appointments and then were burned alive by Hamas, but the knowledge that, the kibbutz
Sinwar was treated in Israel. He has something in Israel, and he was treated, I think, 3 times in Israel.
Yes. I wish one of those operations had gone wrong. But, yes, it's, but, and just take that other one, the thing we now know that, that many of the Hamas attackers, terrorists of the 7th, their bodies, alive or dead, were found with maps of the kibbutz and with exactly which house was which house. What does that mean? It means that these poor families who believed in peace and living together, who were hiring Palestinian workers to give them employment. And you remember, just before, there was another negotiation about more Palestinians coming through the Eretz crossing in order for more people to be working inside Israel. That is gone, dead, when we discovered, and the Israelis discovered, that these people had acted as spies and given the information to Hamas so that they knew exactly who was in which house and how many people they could kill. The idea, that's one of the things I want the outside world to realize, because everyone in Israel realizes it. That dream has died. And very few people, I think, in this country can possibly believe in that dream at the moment. And when the outside world looks in and says things like, that's why you've got to double down on the two-state solution, you just have to say, I'm sorry, this is like you telling me, we've got to go back to Roman law and not build on it at all. All of that is gone. And not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, it seems to me. The fact that the Palestinian Authority celebrated the massacres, the fact that just a couple of days ago they were lynching other Palestinians.
The civilians. I think, the big mistake that some Israelis are still making is a distinction between Hamas and Fatah and the innocent civilians. I think, the idea of, and there was a poll coming out recently 2 days ago about how many people in Gaza think what happened in October 7 was good. Mm-hmm. Now, it's
tricky to poll in Gaza.
It's diminishing because Gaza is doing. Nevertheless, most of Gazan civilians in October 7 were very happy. Very extremely happy.
Yeah, we've got they're letting off fireworks in the West Bank as well.
Definitely.
And
the Prime Minister in the West Bank say, "Wow, this is a great stuff."
Yes.